This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Friday, September 25th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Speaking in recorded messages played at the United Nations General Assembly, African leaders, including Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, urged the international community to unite in the face of the coronavirus pandemic. Also in a recorded message, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari said it's time the UN Security Council included African nations in their decision-making process. Tom Scully reports.
Severely undermined.
Uhuru Kenyatta has warned that competition between global powers threatens to undermine efforts to tackle the coronavirus pandemic.
They have caused severe anxiety and undermined coordinated responses to an economic and social character that would have left us in a stronger position as a global collective.
The Kenyan president, speaking in pre-recorded comments at the United Nations General Assembly, called for the international community to remain anchored in multilateralism with a unity of purpose.
Mr. President,
he was one of several leaders bringing an African perspective on the pandemic. On Tuesday, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called for the international community to roll out a comprehensive stimulus package for the continent.
This will enable African countries to not only mitigate the health impacts of COVID-19, but to aid us in the immense task of rebuilding our shattered economies.
The General Assembly also heard from Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari.
We need to cooperate.
He said it was time to open up UN Security Council decision-making to African countries to reflect the diversity and dynamics of the 21st century.
Africa deserves permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council.
And he called for the international community to do more to eradicate poverty and fight multinational crime.
That was Tom Scully of Reuters reporting. A Ghanaian artist is documenting the journey of secondhand clothes imported into Ghana and how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting those who rely on the trade. Authorities say they are reinforcing a ban on imported secondhand underwear because of public health concerns. But used clothing traders say any ban impacts their incomes, already under strain from the pandemic. Stacey Knott reports from Accra.
Ghanaian artist Sal Kofiga documents how imported second-hand clothes pass through Accra's Kantamanto market. The market specialises in used goods, most of them discarded by Western countries.
In this process of distribution, we get people who are carrying these goods on their shoulders and then on their heads to warehouses, to shops and all these things. And then we have people who pull the bills on trucks and then distribute them to other places. So before the shirts even or the dress even gets to the unknown person who is coming to buy it, there is a lot of work that goes into it. And that is where I am more interested in trying to see how these things affect people.
Before the coronavirus pandemic, the American Ore Foundation estimated 15 million clothing items arrived at the market weekly, 40% of which were thrown away. But some traders and market workers say the pandemic has affected those imports and they are left struggling to get by.
Because of the COVID, the business calmed down. Even I have a child. Even the whole of the day, if I don't get something, how can my child feed?
Authorities say they are working to reinforce a 1994 ban on imports of some used items, such as underwear, for fear they could spread disease. An advocacy group says most buyers are careful to wash used clothing before they wear it, warning that stopping the trade only hurts those buying and selling these goods.
The informal economy, we like it or not, plays a very big role in government's management of economic situations. So sometimes when politicians try to raise, they just see one law somewhere and then they ask them and they say, that law, it bans these people from this. We are going to enforce it. You can't enforce laws when you don't create alternatives.
For his part, Kofiga also turns fabrics from the market into upcycled clothes, which he hopes will inspire a greener global fashion industry. Kofiga says he doesn't want second-hand garment imports into Ghana to cease. He just wants to highlight the problem of excessive waste and inspire people to appreciate goods that still have some use. Stacey Knott for VOA News, Accra.
Of all the changes the COVID-19 pandemic is forcing on the world, the sense of isolation is one of the most challenging. And it turns out that according to psychologists who study the effects of isolation on mental health, all that social distancing has made us, well, socially distant. Ostapia Rish has this story narrated by Anna Rice.
Psychiatrists say the COVID pandemic and the focus on social distancing has made us all a bit more lonely and a bit more awkward around other people.
I would like to emphasize the consequences of isolation and loneliness the most, because it is, no doubt, an extremely important factor that affects both physical and mental health. People who spend a long time in isolation, like prisons or hospitals or Antarctica, if you will, definitely lose certain social skills. And the longer they stay, the more they lose.
Markian Prohasko spent almost 2 months in Antarctica. He went there in early 2019 to write a book about the experience of being at a polar station. Later, during quarantine, Markian often drew parallels with his time at the South Pole.
When you're staying at home, sometimes you don't even want to see anyone, but you can always do so. But when circumstances force you to stay at home, you suddenly feel a certain constraint. You can't go anywhere, although you would like to. In Antarctica, it's the same.
After returning from the expedition, it took some time for Markian to adapt to normal life.
When I returned, on the one hand, I wanted to lie low for a few weeks, not to communicate with anyone, maybe only with the loved ones. What can I say? How can I explain it all? On the other hand, many of the things that are common here seemed pointless for a while. I went outside, people were going somewhere. What were they doing?
Experts say there is little doubt people will lose certain social skills during the pandemic. Just as muscles atrophy without exercise, communication skills suffer from isolation. That's why it's important to take care of your mental health.
Communication, human socialization, is no less important than work, exercise, diet, sleep, etc. This is an extremely important element. If people think that during quarantine, half an hour should be spent on exercising, people should also think about the importance of social communication.
And experts add, even the smallest things can help.
If our listeners wanted to improve their mental health today, I would advise them to call and meet with a good old friend with whom they have not talked for a long time, and just talk with him or her for a while.
Sooner or later, the pandemic will come to an end, and the hope is that the world can get rid of the distance and just get back to being social. For Ostapia Rish in Washington, Anna Rice, VOA News.
When her husband died, Imelda Mabo wouldn't let her children go hungry. Now she's reported to be the only woman taxi driver in the Democratic Republic of Congo's Beni region, where violence against women is commonplace. Nazanin Moshiri reports.
Driving a motorbike taxi in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo's city of Beni is viewed by many here a man's job. In a region plagued by violence and an Islamist insurgency, Imelda Imabu is the exception. Locals say Imelda is the only woman driver in a region of almost 1 million people.
My husband died and left me with 6 children. I had nothing to do, so I decided to become a motorbike taxi driver to feed my children.
10 years ago, she gave up her life as a farmer and sank her savings into a red motorbike, known locally as Boda. But it's dangerous work. Violence against women here is commonplace. According to the UN, documented cases of sexual violence in Eastern DRC rose by more than a third last year. Though her family is proud of what she's achieved, her son, Jean-Pierre Mandefu, says they get worried, especially when she travels to distant places. But Mabu says being a woman has also saved her when she was ambushed by bandits while driving in the countryside.
They were dressed in red, blood-stained clothes and wanted to harm me. But when they noticed that I was a woman on a motorbike, they got very surprised and urged me to go on with my journey.
She's also picked up a number of loyal clients, with many women preferring her services to take them to and from the market. And in a city where the majority of people live in extreme poverty, she's ensured her children have clothing, education and medicine, and never go to bed hungry.
Nazanin Moshiri of Reuters reporting. The 15-nation economic community of West African states may announce Friday if it will lift crippling sanctions on Mali. Incoming interim Malian President Bando is expected to be sworn in Friday in Bamako for an 18-month term. On the eve of the ceremony, Ndo met with former Nigerian President and ECOWAS mediator Goodluck Jonathan. Jonathan says ECOWAS could announce Friday whether the official appointments satisfy the organization's conditions to lift sanctions. Ndo is one of the leaders of the junta that seized control of the country after ousting former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a musical treat by Malian singer and legendary guitarist Afel Bocoum. We'll be right back.
It's easy to declare the winner of an election when one candidate has a huge lead. But when the vote is close, it can take time to determine a winner. Votes cast at a polling center are quickly counted. But the process is much slower for mail-in ballots. It takes time for the filled-out ballots to arrive, for election officials to inspect them for authenticity, and to complete the count. So in a close election with a high percentage of mail-in ballots, it could take days and possibly weeks to know who won. Many COVID-concerned voters are expected to vote by mail, increasing chances the 2020 presidential election may not be decided quickly.
Welcome back to Africa 54. U.S. President Donald Trump Wednesday said he would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power if he loses the election, and again questioned the legitimacy of an expected increase in mail-in voting due to the coronavirus pandemic. Recent polling indicates that significantly more Democrats plan to vote by mail than Republicans. VOA's Brian Padden reports Trump's comments came as both parties prepare for the likelihood of a bitterly contested presidential election in November.
The partisan divide over mail-in voting could lead to what some pundits are calling a contested red mirage election. Under that scenario, President Trump might claim victory after securing an early lead on election night, but eventually lose to Democratic Party rival Joe Biden as absentee ballots are counted in the days that follow. Calling mail-in voting fraudulent and a scam, Trump predicts there could be legal challenges to the ballot count that would ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court. This is one reason he has cited for nominating a replacement to recently deceased liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg before the election.
I think it's very important. I think this will end up in the Supreme Court, and I think it's very important that we have 9 justices.
Analysts note that while there is no evidence of widespread vote-by-mail fraud, as the president has alleged, these mail-in ballots do have a higher rejection rate, mostly because voters fail to fill them out properly. Also, as happened during this year's primary elections in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, some states experienced long delays in counting the surge of mail-in ballots.
The more you encourage people to vote by mail, the larger the number of people who will be disenfranchised and their votes aren't going to count.
The Supreme Court's role in all of this, if any, remains to be seen.
But hopefully we won't be in a situation in which we're asking justices to rule on a case that will decide the outcome of the election. I think that would be very problematic for democracy.
In the closely contested 2000 presidential election, the Supreme Court ruled on a vote recount dispute in Florida that essentially provided Republican George W. Bush a victory over former Democratic Vice President Al Gore by 1 electoral vote. Gore then conceded, saying it was for the good of the country, despite winning the overall popular vote. President Trump, when asked Wednesday if he would commit to a peaceful transfer of power if he loses the election, said only we are going to see what happens. With partisan tensions so high, both sides fear a bitterly contested election could spark political clashes between right-wing militias and radical leftists. Brian Patton, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. Agency for Global Media CEO Michael Park is the first presidential appointee to serve in a new position created by Congress to modernize U.S.-funded broadcasting efforts worldwide. Since taking charge in June, the U.S. International Broadcasting CEO has drawn bipartisan criticism for removing agency broadcasting chiefs and initiating a security review that resulted in some foreign Voice of America journalists losing their visas. VOA congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson reports.
From Hong Kong to Belarus to China, 2020 has been a challenging year for a free press and access to information. But lawmakers Thursday mainly scrutinized the decisions of new U.S. International Broadcasting CEO Michael Pack, who ignored a congressional subpoena to appear and answer the committee's questions.
He is making a mockery of a U.S. agency that has long enjoyed strong bipartisan support. And he has shown tremendous disrespect for the committee, our committee, and its role overseeing USAGM. He's the wrong person for the job. He should resign, and if he doesn't, the president should fire him.
Pack is a former documentary filmmaker who has previously headed public and government broadcasting efforts. He testified last September he respects the news agency's editorial independence.
The whole agency rests on the belief that the reporters are independent, that no political influence is telling them how to report the news.
During his 2-year-long confirmation process, Democrats alleged Pack had misused funds from his documentary production company, while Senate Republicans praised his experience.
This man is uniquely qualified to hold this position.
But Pack's decisions since taking charge in June have concerned lawmakers from both parties.
CEO Pack has ignored the will of Congress and withheld millions of dollars in funding from OTF. This is not a typical D.C. policy discussion. I believe his actions damaged support during the height of unrest in Hong Kong, and they are continuing to do so today in Belarus. Their tragic lack of support to freedom and democracy movements is also regrettable.
The Open Technology Fund, a group that uses U.S. government grants to promote internet freedom worldwide, is suing USAGM, alleging it breached its contracts by withholding $18 million in funds.
The goal is not to resolve evidence-based concerns, but rather to discredit OTF. More devastating, the agency continues to withhold nearly $20 million in congressionally allocated funds, forcing OTF to halt 49 out of its 60, or 80%, of its ongoing internet freedom programs.
In June, PAC fired several executives in what Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey called a wholesale firing spree.
To date, more than 3 months later, no successors have been named to replace me or my counterparts at the other networks. Sadly, CEO PAC's arrival has brought only more chaos and uncertainty to U.S. international broadcasting. The turmoil could not come at a worse time. To be blunt, I fear we are falling behind our competitors in the information space.
USAGM has been criticized in a government audit for improperly conducting security checks on some of its journalists, an issue some Republicans praised PAC for addressing.
The reforms undertaken by Mr. PAC have undergone a significant amount of public scrutiny, as they should. But USAGM's poor vetting procedures over those last decades continue to threaten U.S. national security, and it's entirely the fault of those who mismanaged the process.
But one decision was roundly criticized by lawmakers from both parties. PAC ordered a security review that resulted in a failure to renew the J-1 visas of foreign journalists working at VOA.
We bring people here. We ask them to be honest and to speak truth to countries where speaking truth can get you killed, or at least imprisoned. Then Mr. Park denies their the application, refuses to file the application to extend their J-1 visas, which means they're subject to deportation to the very place that we ask them to tell truth to a country where truth is illegal.
At least 5 VOA journalists have departed the country since their work permits expired, and as many as 20 more are expected to leave by the end of the year. PAC has defended its focus on security by suggesting being a journalist could be a cover for being a spy.
It's incredibly dangerous for the USAGM head to start basically writing the press release that the Kremlin can then turn around and use the next week about USAGM journalists.
In a letter to Chairman Engel, PAC said he could not appear before the committee due to a scheduling conflict and offered several possible dates for his testimony in October, when the U.S. House is expected to be out of session. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for our entertainment report featuring Music Time in Africa host Heather Maxwell, who presents a collage-style video by legendary guitarist, singer, songwriter Afel Bocoum, who is from northern Mali. Afel is one of the last living musicians who was a founding member of Ali Fakra Toure's band. The video, Penda Jiga, comes off of Bocoum's new highly acclaimed album, Linde, released on September 4th. Here's Heather Maxwell.
Hi, Esther. Hello, everyone. We are going to watch a brand new collage-style music video from an artist from the northern part of Mali. His name is Afel Bocoum. He's a legendary guitarist, singer-songwriter. He specializes in music from the north, otherwise known as the desert blues. So this is one of his brand new songs off his new album, and it's called Penda Jiga. I'll come back in the middle and tell you more about what the song's about.
Salam alaikum, kayana kambayana moya, ay maloya waname.
What Afel is singing about in this song is, well, you can tell it's a journey because you see the car traveling and you see Afel inside the car. He's trying to get to his friend's daughter's engagement party. and the girl's name is Penda. However, he explains that as he's on his way, he gets stopped by the police, and they harass him, and he's almost beaten, and he still keeps trying to get to Penda's engagement party. And by the time he finally gets freed from the police, he only has time to meet her at the airport before she's on her way to Michigan, United States. I'm from Michigan. Another thing you'll notice in this video are the images, this emerging of real footage in black and white, and then images of, strange artistic images of different cultural icons that are African, but they're actually really Malian icons. So you see the Dogon masks, those tall masks. You see the cliffs of the Dogon people, the boats, you see people fishing. All these things represent Mali and different places that Afel himself has gone on all of his journeys as a performing artist. Now there's also some horn lines in there. It's actually trombone parts that don't sound like the desert blues typically, and that's because they're not. This was a World Circuit production, and World Circuit is based in the UK, and they specialize in world music. So they had Vin Gordon, the trombonist who played with Bob Marley for decades, playing on this. That's the horn lines you're hearing in there, and plus some other interesting sounds, some guitar by one of the engineers. There's a guitar solo by another Malian artist named Mamadou Kelly. There's a lot of different artists involved in the production of this sound. That's what makes it fresh and unique, yet still rooted in the desert blues from Mali. So that was Penda Jiga by Afel Bocoum from northern Mali. It was produced by Paul Chandler and World Circuit Records. I'm Heather Maxwell. Now, enjoy your weekend.
That was VOA's Heather Maxwell with a featured video from Afel Bocoum entitled Penda Jiga. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.